Hello and welcome to a conversation that I'm calling Then and Now, a conversation with Hosea, a project where we're going to read through the entire book of Hosea, one of the minor prophets. Spent a little bit of time each day in Hosea's context and then let the prophet ask us some questions in return. My name is Derek Hoban. I'm the pastor at Salem Lutheran Church in Orlando, Florida. And today is the third day. The first day we dwelt in just the first verse and this list of kings that gave us a sense of some of the political instability and the empires around the people of Israel that were leaning in on them in these times, and how war and all of the activity that goes around with that marked the time of the prophet. Yesterday we read just two more verses, verses 2 and 3, and talked about the ways that underlying a troublesome metaphor about infidelity in marriage with Gomer's wife is some care we need to take with that sort of a metaphor, even as it's used to talk about the people's infidelity as it related to their commitment to God's commandments and worshiping God as the only God. Today we're going to read verse 3 again and through verse 9, so we're picking up some momentum, but verse 3 leads into the rest of those verses well. So he, Hosea, went and took Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And the Lord said to him, "Name him Jezreel, for in a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. On that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel." She conceived again and bore a daughter. Then the Lord said to him, "Name her Lo Ruhamah, for I will no longer have pity on the house of Israel or forgive them. But I will have pity on the house of Judah, and I will save them by the Lord their God. I will not save them by bow or by sword or by war or by horses or by horsemen." When she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, she conceived and bore a son. Then the Lord said, "Name him Lo Ami, for you are not my people, and I am not your God." These verses 3 through 9 have names for these children of Hosea and Gomer that are symbolic. It would not have been unusual for them to have symbolic names in that day, but these names are symbolic in ways that are a little bit harsh. It's hard to imagine kids going through life with these names. But each in turn, James Lindbergh would say, is the prophet pointing to a future that is different from the way the people of Israel had understood themselves in the past. So if you take the first one, the son that they named Jezreel, the text mentions Jehu for the blood of Jezreel. Jehu in the past had killed the king of Israel and the king of Judah and a whole bunch of Baal worshipers, all at Jezreel. And so this announcement that this kid is going to have this name and that there will be an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel is the prophet saying that there is going to come a time when the monarchy is no more. That ends up being true. And in this text, God says that the southern kingdom of Judah will be spared, but that monarchy comes to an end as well. So this first child's name points to the end of monarchy. The second one, the daughter, Lo Ruhamah, is the meaning of that is I will no longer have pity on the house of Israel or forgive them. This then imagines a future not just where the monarchy is ended, but also a future where God's compassion has stopped. And when you think about the things we hear in the Psalms about God's steadfast love and God's mercy and God's faithfulness, this is an announcement that those things are not going to be experienced by the house of Israel, by the people of Israel anymore. Then you get to the third child, Lo Ami, and the name there means, for you are not my people and I am not your God. This, again, there was this time, many places in Scripture where God says, I will be your God and you will be my people. And this is saying the reverse of that. And so if you take the three together, there's the failure of the monarchy, the absence of God's compassion, and then altogether an absence of relationship with God. Now, this is pretty harsh, and if this is where the book ended, we would be left with some tough space to sit in. But really, the book of Hosea alternates between doom and hope, these gloomy-sounding texts, and then a hope that things can ultimately get better. As we hear this, we should note that this is not a judgment on these children or on Gomer herself. These are judgments on the monarchy, judgments on the leadership, judgments on the whole of its culture and the way that they had distanced themselves from God. And that then becomes reflective, right? This lack of a relationship with God, this lack of compassion, this monarchy that's failing is more reflective of the people's actions than it is of God's. And the question it can then put before us in our day is what ways do we get away from God, whether that's the relationship, whether it's the way that we exercise compassion, whether it's the way that we look to leadership in our world and in our church. These are questions that will come up for Hosea in terms of religious and political leadership as well. And when we think then about our context in those ways, in what aspects of that are we failing at compassion and failing at tending to our relationship with God? Maybe there's parts of it that we are successful at, but the trick with a text like this one today that is so gloomy is to not move too quickly to the hope, right? It's to spend a little bit of introspective kind of confessional time at where it is that we are failing in the similar ways that the people of Israel did in their time. That is it for day 3. Tomorrow we will continue in chapter 1, picking up at verse 10. Thank you for being with me in this journey and conversation with Hosea.